Cowboy claimed the Apache woman. "It's too much, but I accept," she whispered. The sun had just begun to rise over the wide lands of the American Southwest. The sky slowly changed from deep purple to soft orange, and the light touched the dry earth like a warm hand. The desert looked endless, stretching far beyond what the eyes could see. There were tall cacti standing proudly, low bushes fighting to survive, and dusty trails carved by hooves and wagon wheels. The air was dry, but the morning breeze carried a calm silence that felt almost peaceful. Daniel Harper was already awake before the sun came up. He had grown used to early mornings. Life as a cowboy did not allow long sleep. His days were filled with hard work, long rides, and responsibility. He worked on a large ranch owned by an older man who trusted him deeply. Daniel was not loud like some of the other cowboys. He did not waste words. He believed in doing his work properly and letting his actions speak for him. That morning he saddled his horse slowly, checking every strap carefully. His horse, a strong brown animal named Rusty, had been his companion for years. Daniel often spoke to Rusty in a low voice, not because the horse understood every word, but because it made the long days feel less lonely. After tying his hat firmly and adjusting his boots, he rode out toward the grazing fields. The land they worked on was near territory where a small Apache community lived. Both groups had shared the same open spaces for years, but there was always distance between them. The ranchers stayed mostly on their side, and the Apache families kept to theirs. There were no open fights at that time, but there was also no real friendship. Each side had been raised to be careful of the other. Daniel had heard many stories growing up. Some were warnings, some were full of fear. But as he grew older, he realized that most stories were told by people who had never truly tried to understand the other side. He did not speak much about his thoughts, yet deep inside he believed that not everyone deserved to be judged by old tales. By midday, the heat had grown strong. The sun stood high in the sky, and the air shimmered above the sand. Daniel had been guiding cattle toward a safer grazing area, but the journey was longer than he expected. Rusty began to slow down slightly, and Daniel noticed something was wrong. The horse's step was uneven. He quickly dismounted and checked the hoof. A small sharp stone had lodged itself in a sensitive spot. Rusty was not badly hurt, but he could not continue without care. Daniel sighed softly. There was a watering place not too far ahead, a natural spring that both ranchers and the Apache people used from time to time. It was one of the few shared resources in the area. Leading Rusty carefully by the reins, Daniel walked toward the spring. The heat made each step heavier, and sweat gathered on his forehead. When he finally reached the water, he was relieved to see the cool, clear pool surrounded by smooth stones and short grass. But he was not alone. On the other side of the spring stood a young Apache woman with long, dark hair tied back neatly. She wore simple clothing, practical for travel in the heat. Beside her stood a younger boy, perhaps her brother, holding 2 empty water containers. They'd clearly arrived before him and were quietly filling their containers. Daniel stopped walking. For a brief moment, time felt frozen. The silence between them was thick, not hostile, but careful. He knew he had entered shared ground. He did not want to cause discomfort. The young woman looked at him directly. Her expression was calm, but guarded. She did not look frightened. Instead, she looked observant, as if measuring his intentions without saying a word. Daniel gently removed his hat as a sign of respect. He did not step closer. He simply nodded once and moved to a different side of the water, giving them space. He tied Rusty loosely to a nearby branch and knelt to examine the hoof more closely. The small stone was stuck deeper than he expected. He tried to remove it carefully, but Rusty shifted uncomfortably. Daniel spoke softly to calm the horse, but it was clear he needed steadier hands. From across the water, the young woman watched quietly. She exchanged a glance with the boy beside her. The boy looked unsure, but she gave him a small nod. Without speaking, she walked slowly around the edge of the spring, stopping a short distance away from Daniel. He looked up surprised, but not alarmed. She gestured toward the horse's hoof, silently asking permission to help. Daniel hesitated only for a second, then nodded gratefully, stepped slightly aside, keeping a respectful distance. She knelt down with steady confidence. Her movements were careful and practiced. It was clear she had experience with animals. Using the small tool she carried, she worked gently around the stone until it loosened. Rusty relaxed almost immediately. Daniel let out a quiet breath of relief. "Thank you," he said simply. She did not answer at first. Instead, she stood up and gave a small nod. The boy smiled shyly, clearly pleased that the horse was better. After a moment, she spoke in calm English. "He will walk fine now, but do not ride too hard today." It carried quiet strength. Daniel nodded again. "I won't. I appreciate your help." No dramatic words. But something had shifted in that brief exchange. It was not just about removing a stone from a hoof. It was about breaking a wall that had stood silently for years. The young woman returned to her side of the spring. She lifted one of the filled containers easily, showing she was stronger than she first appeared. The boy picked up the other. Before leaving, she looked back once, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. Daniel noticed it, and for the first time, he allowed himself a small smile. As they disappeared beyond the low hills, Daniel remained by the water for several minutes. He thought about how simple the moment had been. No anger. No harsh words. Just help freely given. When he finally mounted Rusty again, he rode slower than usual, remembering her advice. The desert no longer felt as divided as it had that morning. It was still vast and dry, still full of challenges, but now it carried a memory of shared kindness. Later that evening, as Daniel sat by the ranch fire with the other cowboys, he did not mention what had happened. Some of them might not understand. Instead, he quietly replayed the moment in his mind. The steady hands, the calm eyes, the soft but confident voice. On the other side of the land, the young woman, whose name was Ayanna, also thought about the encounter. She had seen many ranchers from a distance. Some rode past quickly without looking. Others stared with clear distrust. This one had removed his hat and stepped aside. He had not demanded space. He had shown respect. Her grandmother noticed her thoughtful silence that evening and asked gently what was on her mind. Ayanna simply said she had helped a traveler with a horse. She did not say more, but her thoughts lingered. Neither of them knew that this quiet meeting at the watering place was only the beginning. It was not dramatic. It did not feel like the start of a great story. But sometimes the strongest bridges are built from the smallest actions. The land remained the same. The sun would rise again. The cattle would need guiding. Water would still be carried home. Yet from that day forward, whenever Daniel rode near the spring, he no longer saw it as a boundary. And whenever Ayanna approached the water, she no longer expected every outsider to look at her with distance. In a land shaped by heat and history, a simple act of help had planted a seed. And though seeds grow slowly in dry ground, they grow strong when given patience. After that quiet morning at the watering spring, life did not suddenly change. The sun still rose early, the cattle still needed guiding, and the desert wind still carried dust across the land. But something small had shifted inside Daniel Harper. He found himself thinking about the young Apache woman more often than he expected. He told himself it was only curiosity. After all, it was not every day that someone stepped forward to help without hesitation. Her steady hands and calm voice had stayed in his mind. More than that, it was the way she had looked at him, not with fear, not with anger, but with careful thought. It had been a look that asked a question without speaking it. A few days later, Daniel's work once again took him near the spring. This time, he did not pretend it was by accident. He had planned his route carefully, telling himself it was the shortest way to guide the herd. Deep down, he knew he hoped to see her again. The spring looked the same as always. Clear water reflected the wide sky. The tall rocks nearby cast long shadows in the late afternoon. For a moment, he thought he had arrived too early or too late. The place seemed empty. Then he heard quiet movement behind the low trees. Ayanna stepped forward, carrying a woven basket. She noticed him at the same time. For a brief second, both of them paused, just like the first day. But this time, the silence felt less heavy. Daniel removed his hat again, offering the same respectful nod. "Good afternoon," he said in a calm voice. Ayanna studied him carefully before replying. "Your horse walks well today." Daniel smiled slightly. "Thanks to you." She did not smile widely, but there was a soft light in her eyes that showed she remembered. She walked toward the spring and began filling a small container with water. Daniel stayed on his side, not stepping too close. There were many things he could have said, yet he chose simple words. "I'm Daniel," he said after a moment. She looked at him, thinking for a few seconds before answering. "Ayanna." Daniel repeated it quietly so he would not forget. That afternoon, their conversation remained short. They spoke about the weather, about how dry the land had been that season. Nothing deep, nothing personal. But every word built a small piece of trust. Over the next few weeks, their meetings became more frequent. Sometimes it truly was coincidence. Other times, both of them chose the same hour without admitting it. They never rushed toward each other. They allowed the space between them to close slowly, like the careful steps of two people crossing a fragile bridge. Daniel began bringing small gestures, never anything that would seem too bold. Once he left a piece of fresh bread wrapped in clean cloth on a flat rock near the spring. He did not hand it directly to her. He simply said, "My cook made extra." Then he stepped back. Ayana looked at the bread thoughtfully. She understood the meaning behind such a gesture. It was not payment for help. It was not an attempt to show power. It was sharing. The next time they met, she brought something in return, dried herbs tied neatly with string. "For your horse," she explained. "It keeps insects away." Daniel accepted it with gratitude. "Thank you." Neither tried to give more than the other. Respect stayed at the center of every action. And still, not everyone around them felt comfortable. At the ranch, a few cowboys began noticing Daniel's changed routes. One evening, while sitting near the fire, a man named Carl raised an eyebrow. "You been riding close to Apache land lately?" he said casually. "Water's there, shorter path for the herd." Carl gave a doubtful look but said nothing more. The ranch owner trusted Daniel's judgment, and that was enough to stop deeper questioning, for now. On the other side, Ayana's younger brother had also begun to notice. He once asked her quietly, "Why do you speak to him?" Ayana thought carefully before answering. "Because he listens." That answer was simple but true. Daniel did not interrupt her. He did not laugh at her ways or question her traditions. When she explained how her people watched the sky to predict weather, he paid attention. When she showed him which desert plants could be used for healing, he did not dismiss it as strange. One afternoon, dark clouds gathered faster than expected. The wind began to rise sharply, carrying sand through the air. Daniel had been checking fence lines near the edge of Apache territory when the storm grew stronger. The sky turned gray and visibility dropped. He knew he would not reach the ranch in time. As he struggled to guide Rusty through the blowing sand, he saw a faint shape ahead, someone waving from higher ground. It was Ayana. She signaled for him to follow her toward a narrow rocky path he had never noticed before. Trusting her direction, he guided his horse carefully behind her. The path led to a natural shelter formed by large stones. It blocked most of the wind and offered safety until the storm passed. They waited there as the storm raged around them. Sand hit the rocks loudly, and the air felt tense. Yet inside the shelter, there was calm. For the first time, they spoke longer than usual. Daniel admitted he had not known about that path. Ayana explained that her people had used it for many years during sudden storms. She spoke of growing up learning the land like a friend, understanding its moods and signals. Daniel listened closely. He realized how little he truly knew about the desert beyond cattle routes. To him, it had always been a place to cross. To her, it was home. When the storm finally faded, the sky cleared quickly, leaving a fresh quiet behind. Daniel felt deep gratitude. "You saved me trouble today," he said honestly. Ayana shook her head gently. "The land gives warnings. You just have to see them." From that day, something deeper formed between them. Not romance in a loud way, but partnership and understanding. Still, whispers grew louder on both sides. Some ranchers began to speak more openly. "Careful where your loyalties stand," one warned Daniel quietly. He did not argue. He simply answered, "My loyalty stands with what's right." Meanwhile, a few elders in Ayana's community noticed her longer absences near the spring. Her grandmother asked gentle questions, not with anger, but with concern. Ayana explained that the cowboy had shown respect, nothing more. Her grandmother listened carefully and finally said, "Respect is rare, but be patient. Trust must be tested." Ayana understood those words deeply. As weeks passed, Daniel found himself looking forward to their conversations. He admired her strength, the way she carried herself without fear. She admired his calm nature, how he never tried to control the space between them. They did not speak of the future. They did not make promises, but every shared moment added another layer of quiet respect. One evening, as the sun painted the desert in gold and red, they stood by the spring watching the reflection of the sky in the water. "It feels different now," Daniel said softly. Ayana glanced at him. "What feels different? This place. It doesn't feel divided anymore." She looked across the land thoughtfully. "Division lives in people's minds," she replied. "Not in the earth." Her words stayed with him long after he rode back to the ranch. Their bond was still fragile. One wrong step could break it. But it was growing, not from excitement or rebellion, but from patience. They were learning each other's world slowly, learning when to speak and when to stay silent, learning that true understanding does not rush forward. It waits, observes, and then moves carefully. In a land where history had built invisible walls, two people were quietly building something different, not loudly, not boldly, but steadily. And sometimes the quiet beginnings are the strongest of all. The season began to change, and with it came a tension that could be felt in the air. The dry winds grew stronger, and the land looked more tired than before. Water sources became lower, and grazing space became a matter of concern. Both the ranchers and the Apache community depended on the same wide desert, and when nature became harsh, even small misunderstandings could grow quickly. Daniel noticed the shift first at the ranch. The older ranch owner studied maps more often and spoke in a worried tone about cattle wandering too close to land that was not clearly marked. Some of the younger cowboys complained openly. They blamed the Apache families for guiding their horses near shared grasslands. Their voices carried frustration, even though no one had tried to talk calmly about it. On the other side, Ayanna sensed worry among her people as well. The elders gathered more often to discuss water levels and safe paths for travel. The younger men felt protective of their land and traditions. They feared that if they stepped back even a little, they might lose more than grazing space. The past had taught them to be careful. Ayanna and Daniel continued meeting at the spring, but their conversations now carried a heavier tone. The easy calm from before was touched by concern. One evening, as the sky turned pale gold, Daniel spoke more seriously than usual. "There is talk at the ranch," he admitted. "Some believe the Apache riders are moving closer to our fences." Ayanna listened quietly before answering. "There is talk here, too. Some believe your cattle are crossing into areas we've used for many seasons." Neither accused the other. Neither raised their voice. They both understood that they stood between two worlds that did not easily trust. For the first time, Daniel felt the weight of what their friendship meant. It was no longer only about shared kindness. It was about standing steady when others pulled away. Days later, the tension reached a moment that could not be ignored. A small group of ranchers rode toward the edge of Apache land to confront what they believed was a boundary issue. At the same time, several Apache riders approached from the opposite direction to protect their side. The meeting place happened to be not far from the spring, the same peaceful place that had first brought Daniel and Ayanna together. Daniel had heard about the planned ride that morning. He felt uneasy. He knew how quickly strong words could turn into lasting division. Without fully planning it, he saddled Rusty and rode toward the meeting point, hoping to prevent something worse. When he arrived, both groups were already facing each other. No one had drawn weapons, but the air felt sharp. Accusations were spoken firmly. Each side believed they were right. The land between them seemed smaller than ever. Daniel's heart pounded. He saw Ayanna standing slightly behind her elders. Her expression was calm, but her eyes showed concern. She noticed him immediately. One of the ranchers, Carl, spoke loudly. "We won't have our cattle pushed out," an Apache elder replied firmly, "and we will not step away from land we have respected for generations." The words circled back and forth, growing stronger, but not yet out of control. In that tense moment, Daniel made a decision that surprised even himself. He guided Rusty forward until he stood between both groups, not blocking either side, but placing himself where everyone could see him clearly. "Listen," he called out, his voice steady but loud enough to carry. Both sides turned toward him. Some looked confused. Others looked annoyed. Daniel removed his hat, not as a sign of weakness, but as a sign of respect. He took a deep breath before speaking again. "We share this land," he said. "The water, the grass, the sky above us. If we keep arguing, we lose more than space." "We lose peace," Carl frowned. "Whose side are you on, Daniel?" Daniel did not hesitate. "I stand on the side of fairness." This was not the answer many expected. Then he did something even more unexpected. He spoke openly about Ayanna. "I have come to know someone from the Apache community," he said clearly. "Not as an enemy, not as a stranger, but as someone worthy of respect." The words fell heavily into the silence. Ayanna felt her breath catch slightly. She had not expected him to speak so openly, especially in front of everyone. Daniel continued, his voice firm but calm. "I intend to build a life with her if she chooses the same. Not by leaving my world, not by asking her to leave hers, but by standing together." The ranchers looked stunned. Some whispered among themselves. On the Apache side, elders exchanged thoughtful glances. Daniel's statement was not loud or dramatic, yet it carried deep meaning. He was not claiming ownership. He was declaring partnership. He was saying that connection was possible even when history said otherwise. All eyes slowly turned toward Ayanna. She felt the weight of every gaze. Her heart beat fast, but her face remained composed. She stepped forward slightly, standing beside her elders but not hiding behind them. In that moment, many thoughts moved through her mind. She thought of her grandmother's words about patience. She thought of the kindness at the spring, the shelter during the storm, the quiet respect that had grown over months. She also thought of the risk, the possibility of rejection, the fear of stepping into something larger than herself. Daniel looked at her, not demanding, not pleading, simply waiting. The silence stretched long enough for everyone to feel its depth. Finally, Ayanna spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it carried clearly across the open space. "It is not a small thing," she began. "It is not simple." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "It is too much, but I accept." She was not surrendering her identity. She was choosing courage. The reaction around them was mixed. Some ranchers looked disappointed. Some Apache riders looked uncertain, but no one shouted. No one stepped forward in anger. The calm way they both spoke had softened what could have been a harsh moment. One of the Apache elders finally stepped forward. He studied Daniel carefully before speaking. "If you stand beside her, you must respect her people." Daniel nodded immediately. "I will." Then the ranch owner, who had arrived quietly during the exchange, cleared his throat. "And if you choose this path, Daniel, you carry our name with honor." "I understand," Daniel replied. The gathering slowly began to loosen. The argument about land did not disappear in one day, but the energy shifted. Instead of sharp confrontation, there were quieter conversations. Leaders from both sides agreed to meet again, with calmer discussion. As the groups began to move away, Daniel and Ayanna stood facing each other for a brief moment alone. "You did not have to speak today," she said softly. "Yes," he replied. "I did." She looked at him carefully. "It will not be easy." The sun began to lower, painting the sky with soft orange and pink. What had started as a tense confrontation ended with a fragile but real possibility of peace. Their declaration did not solve every problem. It did not remove every doubt, but it changed the direction of the moment. Instead of two sides pulling apart, there was now a bridge standing quietly between them. As Daniel rode back toward the ranch that evening, he felt both nervous and proud. He had stepped into something larger than himself. Ayanna walked back toward her community with steady steps, aware that her choice would shape her future. The desert remained wide and dry. The wind still carried old stories. But now it also carried new ones, stories of courage spoken in calm voices. And sometimes the bravest words are not shouted. They are whispered with steady hearts. Daniel and Ayanna had spoken their choice in front of both communities. The words had been calm, but their meaning was powerful. Now they had to live with that meaning every single day. The first few weeks were the hardest. At the ranch, conversations changed when Daniel walked into a room. The men who once joked freely around the fire became quiet. Some still treated him the same, but others looked at him with doubt. They did not shout or argue, yet their silence felt heavy. One evening, Carl finally spoke what others were thinking. "You're stepping into something that won't be easy," he said. His tone was not angry, just serious. "People don't forget old differences quickly. I don't expect them to." "Then why do it?" Carl asked. Daniel looked toward the dark horizon before answering, because respect matters more than fear. Carl did not reply, but he did not argue either. On the other side, Ayanna faced her own challenges. Some women in her community watched her carefully. A few younger members whispered when she passed by. They worried that she might slowly drift away from her traditions. Her grandmother, however, stood beside her. One quiet afternoon while they prepared food together, her grandmother spoke gently. "When you walk between two worlds, you must carry both with balance. Do not drop one to hold the other." Ayanna understood. She did not want to leave her people. She did not want Daniel to leave his. What they had promised was not escape. It was partnership. Soon they realized something important. If they wanted others to slowly accept their choice, they could not hide. They had to live openly and honestly. Instead of staying only at the ranch or only in the Apache camp, they began spending time in both places, with respect and patience. Daniel started visiting the Apache community more often, always asking permission before entering shared spaces. He listened to elders speak about the land, about seasons, about traditions that had been passed down for generations. He did not interrupt or pretend to know more. He simply listened. When gatherings were held, he stood quietly in the background unless invited forward. Over time, some of the older men began speaking to him directly. They asked about cattle routes, about weather patterns, about trade. He answered honestly. Meanwhile, Ayanna visited the ranch. At first, she felt every eye on her. The buildings looked different from her home. The sounds were louder. The smell of leather, hay, and animals filled the air. But she did not show fear. She helped repair simple tools. She offered advice when she saw animals struggling in the heat. Once, when a calf became separated from its herd during the dust storm, she noticed its tracks and guided a young cowboy to find it safely. Her calm thinking impressed them. Slowly, actions began to speak louder than whispers. Still, life was not without difficulty. There were days when Daniel returned from work tired not just in body but in spirit. A careless comment from someone at the ranch could stay in his mind all evening. Ayanna also faced moments when certain people avoided speaking to her directly. On one such evening, as they sat near the spring where everything had started, Daniel sighed deeply. "Do you ever wonder if we asked for too much?" he asked quietly. Ayanna watched the water move gently over the stones. "Yes," she admitted. "But I also know that doing nothing would have been easier. Not better, just easier." Her words reminded him why they had chosen this path. Instead of letting doubt grow, they decided to create something physical, a place that represented both of them. They chose a piece of land that stood between the ranch and the Apache settlement. It was not owned fully by either side, but it had long been unused open ground. After speaking with leaders from both communities, they received careful approval to build a small home there. It was not large or grand. It was simple, built with wood from the ranch and stone gathered from nearby hills. The design reflected both worlds. The front porch resembled ranch homes, while the back cooking area followed Apache tradition. It was not about decoration. It was about meaning. Many people doubted whether such a home would truly stand strong. But Daniel worked every day after ranch duties, and Ayanna joined him whenever she could. Some young ranch hands quietly helped lift beams. A few Apache relatives brought woven mats and handmade items for the interior. Little by little, the house rose from the ground. The day they finished placing the final wooden beam, the sky was clear and bright. The desert wind felt calm, almost as if approving the effort. They did not hold a loud celebration. Instead, they invited a few elders and the ranch owner for a shared meal. The gathering was small but important. People from both sides sat near one another, not fully comfortable yet, but not hostile either. During the meal, stories were exchanged. The ranch owner spoke about the early days of building his cattle business. An Apache elder shared a story about reading the stars for guidance. For the first time, those stories were not spoken separately. They were shared in the same space. The house slowly became more than just their home. Travelers passing through sometimes stopped for water. Disagreements about grazing were occasionally discussed there instead of at tense boundary lines. Because Daniel and Ayanna belonged to both sides, people felt slightly safer speaking calmly under their roof. One year, a severe dry season tested everyone. Water sources shrank quickly. Cattle grew weaker. Crops struggled. Fear could have easily brought old divisions back. But Ayanna remembered hidden seasonal water paths taught to her by elders. She and Daniel worked together to guide small groups of cattle safely toward those areas without harming Apache land. In return, the ranch provided extra supplies for Apache families struggling during the drought. It did not make every heart trust immediately, but it created something stronger than suspicion, shared survival. There were still nights when Daniel lay awake, wondering if he was strong enough for this life between two worlds. There were still mornings when Ayanna felt the weight of expectations from both sides. Yet each time doubt appeared, they remembered the reason behind their choice. It had never been about proving others wrong. It had been about living truthfully. Over time, small changes became visible. Children from the ranch sometimes ran near the shared house, curious about Apache crafts. Apache children watched cattle herding with interest. Laughter began replacing awkward silence. Carl, the ranch hand who once questioned Daniel, visited one evening with a broken saddle strap. Ayanna repaired it skillfully while explaining the stitching method. Carl thanked her sincerely before leaving. It was a small moment, but it showed growth. Her grandmother often visited, sitting proudly near the doorway. "Balance," she would remind them softly. "Always balance." The house stood firm against storms and heat. It symbolized something simple but powerful, unity built through daily effort. Daniel and Ayanna did not become leaders by title. They did not seek attention, but through steady actions, helping during drought, offering neutral ground for discussion, respecting traditions, they slowly reshaped the space around them. Life remained challenging. Differences did not disappear. But instead of being separated by fear, both communities now had a living example that cooperation was possible. The land between them no longer felt like a dividing line. It felt like shared ground. And in that quiet home built of wood and stone, two people continued choosing each other every day, not through loud words, but through steady work, patience, and respect.